So first of all, thank you very much for hosting me here. It's a pleasure, and actually now that I know you a little bit more, actually I think it was really worth coming, honestly. Hopefully, hopefully you will also kind of think that it was worth inviting me. Let's see at the end of the talk, all right? And so actually, today is a very unusual talk. I told Melanie that I never gave this talk, so I don't know how long it is, number one. Number two, I try to be as complementary as possible to what you have seen so far, giving really the robotics perspective on the story. I mean, hopefully you will learn something out of that, okay? I'm not a comp person. I just kind of disclaimer right away. And I wanted to talk a little bit more about forms and strength and limitation of communication in, I would say, distributed cyber-physical systems, in particular distributed robotics. And if you allow me, since Sophie put the theme, I didn't put actually, Sophie, the various countries where the guy is coming from. I fully support your thing. But what I'm particularly proud, and here we're even missing one female PhD student, is that I actually fought very hard to have the gender balance, because I think it's very important as well to actually have this. In this diversity, there are two orthogonal planes. One is the countries, maybe the kind of the origin, the training, but also female, male in the labs. I think it's very nice. So we are, right now we have 6 PhD students, and 3 are female and 3 male, which is great. So what do we do? Well, this is a little bit our research landscape. I did most of my career here, multi-robot systems and so on. I'll come back to that. But since I came back to EPFL, also we're part, maybe you didn't notice, we're part of a school called Architecture, Civil and Environmental Engineering. It's part of the challenge here. I'm part of the Environmental Engineering Institute. And so it's kind of a pilot project, if you want, to get an EECS person like me in the middle of environmental engineers. Not always easy, but I made it through. Now it's 10 years. And so that area has also expanded, so kind of sensor networks and various mobile or statics. And also we host the transportation center at EPFL. So intelligent vehicles, there is a lot of robotics coming into intelligent vehicles. And so these areas might appear separate, but they actually have a lot in common. Robotics call for papers in all these areas. And that's the way that we survive. So our focus is typically, we do most of the publication and models, controls, algorithms. We know we do mechatronic design, and you will see a few examples here. And all of us, actually anything that we produce must be publishable in conferences, in robotics or journal conferences. But then obviously these guys here have their own community, intelligent transportation systems, intelligent vehicles, sensor network is another community, and often my collaborators that work in this area have a feet there and a feet in robotics, a solid feet in robotics, okay? All right, so that's a little bit the way that we survive and keep cohesiveness, I would say, among the group. One important point that I wanted to actually, you will see these actors, then various of platforms in the talk, is this kind of, if you want, the size, the physical size, right? We go from 2 centimeters, sometimes even lower, to 3.5 meters platforms, okay? So this changed totally the resources that you can have on board. Often they actually have different mobility capabilities, right? I mean, it's a ground, kind of underwater, flying, and they operate in different environment. So that changed a little bit the story, and actually is maybe one of our strengths and weaknesses at the same time, that actually we can handle a little bit all these differences and in terms of resources and operation. All right, so the talk of today, I would like to actually start with maybe things that you have heard. I've heard several times that you mentioned stickmergy in the past talks and so on. So I will give you examples here just to visualize, natural examples, but also robotics examples, okay? The way that we interpreted the early days stickmergy, I think is interesting maybe for you to know these things. Then we'll move to direct communication, different physical channels, different purposes. and often unusual maybe for you. Sorry here. And we'll go then to something that, it's behind communication only, in the sense you have a physical substrate, a device, and you want to get out more than just a communication, okay? And you will see I have three examples where you see that essentially when you actually size matter, resource matter, you shrink down things, and you want to squeeze out the best out of this channel. And often these involve mechatronic design. All right, so let me start by indirect communication. And maybe you are also familiar with these definitions and where is this swarm intelligence coming from. So Gerardo Beni in '89 actually came up with this swarm intelligence buzzword. I think it was a very interesting, was working with multi-agents and cellular automata, was a workshop in Japan. And then he actually pointed out a little bit these keywords characterized by decentralized control, lack of synchronicity, simple and quasi-identical members, self-organization, okay? If you look 10 years later, maybe you have read this swarm intelligence book by Eric, Marco Dorigo, and Guy Terola. And it says, any attempt to design algorithms to distribute solving devices inspired by the collective behavior of social insects, colonies, and other animal societies. And if you look a little bit more into the book, they actually point out these two keywords, or these two mechanisms, self-organization and stigmergy, okay? So here was a very neutral definition, I would say, in general. Here is actually colored, bio-inspired, colored definition somehow. And immediately, if we want to actually take advantage of this collective behavior, particularly social insects, there is this keyword stigmergy, okay? So I will not focus on self-organization, also a very interesting topic, but on stigmergy. I'm not sure you all know exactly what stigmergy is, okay? So I actually have here the original definition by Pierre-Paul Grasset, 59. So here is, if you can read French, it's there, but in English, essentially what is very important is that stigmergy is composed by stigma and ergon, so you leave sign, you sting, kind of leave sign of the work in the environment, typically. And so the worker does not direct his work, but is guided by it, okay? So you leave sign in the environment, and the other guys in the team, essentially in the colony, can interpret the signs and react upon that. All right, so it's obviously a way to coordinate the team. So now, maybe you know this, maybe not. This is taken from a biologist, so Guy Terola, that actually this paper on artificial life with Eric Bonabeau as well. But Guy is a biologist, okay? And so that's the way that the biologist classifies, so to speak, the kind of big classification, stigmergy. So there are two types of stigmergies. One is called quantitative, and the other one is called qualitative. So qualitative or continuous, and qualitative or discrete. How many knew about these differences? Can you? Yeah, not that many, right? And it's not just stigmergy. The way the biologists like this, it's obviously stimulus, reaction, and so on. But there is a difference between the two, all right? So what is quantitative? Okay, so quantitative is typically, really, as the name says, is a continuous stimulus. So it's the quantity of stimulus that change the story, okay? And typically, maybe you know, maybe you don't know, but the termite pillar building is actually stimulated by the cloud of pheromones that actually this insect gets in the material in their hand, we cannot say in their mouth somehow. They impregnated with pheromone, with chemical substance, and the more essentially you need a certain critical mass of insects around to actually start a nest, a termite nest, okay? And this is mediated by quantity. The quantity of pheromones is important, okay? Around this kind of, imagine as a cloud around this pillar. Another example is maybe well known, I have a video on that, is this kind of mass recruitment by ants, okay? There they lie pheromones, and it's a function of the quantity of pheromones that essentially the stimulus gets higher, okay? I have an example here. You might or might not familiar with that. Video from Jean-Louis Denebourg lab. He is a complex system person, but cares a lot about complexity in social incest, a lot of interesting contribution, pioneering contribution. And here what you see is a suspended bridge. It's actually, there is the nest, the food source there. They have two branches of, you can see this, is in this case is a symmetric bridge. And the whole scenario is done in a way that somehow you cannot actually be biased by visual cues. That's why it's gray over gray, and so on and so on. So it's a very clever, I would say, experimental setup, showcasing both self-organization and stigmergy. And if the guys were not self-organized, they will actually, in principle, if you do the right design of experience, pick both branches, right? Here they don't pick both branches, they pick one. You do 100 experiments, in principle they pick 50 times branch A and 50 times branch B. But they can decide. This is a binary choice that the colony has to face. And the way that they decide, they actually lie sign in an environment, and this is quantitative stigmergy, okay? In this case, this was the branch on the left winning. All right, so then qualitative, what is qualitative? Qualitative is essentially the difference is in the stimulus is a perceptual stimulus. So this is typically used by the biologists to explain nest building in wasp or bees, okay? So essentially it's not the quantity, but the difference is essentially you find certain configuration of bricks, and then you react in another way. You put a brick on the left, on the right, in the middle, and so on, okay? And this is also very interesting, and here I have again videos by Guy. So this is a kind of a wasp, police wasp bootstrapping of their nest. So you see that they feed at different time with different colors. You will see in a minute again. So pay attention here. Actually, they give material to construct somehow with a certain color, and then you can follow over time the evolution of the nest, okay? And they could model this actually with a number of techniques, and you can really kind of show that you can do very interesting, very sophisticated 3D structures just based on this kind of concept of qualitative stigmergy, okay? All right. So that is on biology. Now we move to engineering. And the first example I want to give you, I mean, these are a little bit historical examples, but you know, when did what is the pioneering example that launched swarm robotics, right? And I think it's this one, the video that I'll show you in here. It's a video of 94, Becker et al. Owen Holland is a good colleague, as well a roboticist. Jean-Louis Denebourg was also involved. Very primitive robots, okay? This was really kind of a revolution, completely changing the paradigm. So there is a switcher here, and actually this switcher is actually triggered if you have 3 or more packs, right? I mean, if you have 3 or more packs, it's switched, and then you leave it on the side and go back and looking for other packs. So it's kind of a pack aggregation experiment. This is Ralph Becker. And they're essentially bulldozing a little bit these packs, okay? But was extremely interesting, and I modeled also that. I mean, here's really the experiments. There is no model, no equation in this talk, okay? Just videos and concept. Hopefully, you will appreciate. But what was extremely interesting is that at that time, in 94, everybody was thinking, we have to plan here, we have to coordinate, and so on. This is totally, there's no coordination other than stigmergy somehow here. It's actually, you modify the environment, and then you see 3 packs, that is triggering, and then it goes back and goes somewhere else. You can model this, and you can even predict not where they have no localization on board and so on, cannot predict where the cluster will be, but you can predict that there is a single cluster with this type of rules, and you can predict also how much time as a function of the environment size, the pack size, how many you can have in the gripper, and the mobility of the robots, and somehow the average speed, and so on. And at the end, so if you went long enough, there will be a cluster that is then a stable attractor, right? You will never split again the cluster. Just cannot control exactly the shape and so on, where it will pop up. But yeah, you can imagine that they will clean up the whole, and at a certain point there is a single cluster, right? Because essentially there is an irreversible mechanism. Anything that is two or one pack will get swiped away. Okay. All right. So that was actually a very cool thing. So what do? We actually see this, and at EPFL, this was the time of my thesis. We want to also go along this line. So this is a kind of a little experiments that we did during my thesis, and we call it. We kind of recall it seed assembling. So seed are these little bricks, if you want, and it's an assembling thing. It's not no longer an aggregation really story, and we didn't realize that much. It's an extremely simple flowchart. You can actually move around with a seed. As soon as you find something else that is considered a seed, you actually drop, and you see they wobble. Very crude sensors. They wobble in front. They pick. I don't have the seed. I pick it up. And then as soon as I find another seed, but I have to recognize, I wobble again with very crude sensors. I see something small, and I actually have to drop my seed in front, and I start my wall, okay? Not perfectly regular, but again. So it's not a cluster. You see, now I have kind of a barrier of seeds, so to speak. I come from there. It's too large. I avoid, all right? So this was interesting somehow, and we then did all sort of kind of modeling techniques. It's there that I started really the idea of modeling these systems. And we did kind of long time experiments here also. This is what we call it a high fidelity simulation. You can really reproduce sensor actuators and details of the body precisely. Here are the real experiments. One of the real experiments, long term, I had to develop a special electric floor for powering the robots from below, because essentially I did the models, and the model predicted that I needed multiple hours to get a single cluster with this thing, right? So this was a major effort to develop this kind of modular floor, electric floor that was used in the lab and so on, but I didn't want to do without actually any reason. So this is an experiment that will conclude after 2 hours, and again, it's not perfectly wall, but it's a stable inline assembly, okay? All right. So then the stick pulling, Aiko already mentioned. You have kind of multiple configurations. This is the classical one. 4 sticks, maybe 5 robots, 2 robots, whatever. We did all sort of things. There is here a protocol. One of the robots cannot lift completely the stick out of alone. Actually, we calibrated the length of the sticks, and it's a function of the gripper, blah, blah, blah. Okay, then we put the stick back if once is actually pulled it out. And you need some sort of, there is no direct communication in this example, in this kind of setup. There is, however, a protocol, so to speak, to pull this out. And the idea is that you pull halfway out, the first one. The second one, they have here elevators, so kind of it's a little encoder here that can measure the elevation of the angle. The other guy that comes there actually grip as well the stick and wobble, you will see in a minute. The first one notice that there is a second one pulling through the elevator sensors and open the gripper, and then the stick can come out completely, okay? So it's really done, very simple, very autonomous, no communication, but there is a protocol, so to speak, of collaboration encoded, hardwired. Again, a very simple flowchart, very simple controller. You have to stick center on the stick, grip and wait. You wait for collaboration. You'll see in a minute. Very simple. All right. So again, high fidelity simulation, reality. This was, by the way, something that we did for a demo in Japan that I had to run for 6 weeks. So we actually fine-tuned it there. So here you see one of the robots actually waiting for help, halfway pulling out the stick. There is interferences, physical interferences, and so on. Okay. They try, and certain point, here you see a collaboration. You see one robot pulling out alpha stick. The second one arrives, wobble in front, detect, yes, there is a tiny object in front of me. It's not another robot, it's not a wall. I lower the gripper, I pull the sticks a little bit. The first one noticed that it's pulled the sticks, open the gripper, and it pulled completely out, okay? So here you see a close-up. First one there, second one pull as well. Push, open, and then there was a little success dance there because it was an exhibition and whatever. All right. But hey, I modeled also this. I mean, if you don't model the success dance, the quantitative performance of the model was wrong. All right, good. So now let me summarize this, and I would like to hear from you what you think, and let's see if my message went through, and also the answer maybe not so trivial. You can maybe argue why it is one thing or the other. So if you allow me, I actually fill this first column here. It's all indirect communication. I hope that nobody complained that there is no dedicated channel, explicit communication or direct communication for coordinating here. All right, so now pack aggregation, the first experiments by Denneburg, is leveraging stigmergy or not? What do you think? Yes. All right, good. Type. What type of stigmergy? Quantitative or qualitative? And why? Exactly. Exactly. Very good. But what is the difference between what I told you, the pheromones and so on, and this?
It's discrete now.
Exactly.
So now we are two different.
No, absolutely. I mean, but
No.
perfect. That's perfect.
Should be continuous, and now we have problems.
Exactly. But so that's exactly the point that I wanted to make. So, in a sense, the answer is correct, in my opinion, quantitative, because it's the size and so on. But unfortunately, we're not talking about a continuous quantity like the pheromones. We're talking about a number of effects. You can count, okay? And this is the typical way that you actually, I come to you interpret essentially, because why is quantitative? Is because we preserve the fact that essentially qualitative in biology, according to their definition, should have a different perception, right? I mean, and that cannot be. But then, I mean, immediately you see here from the two answers that it's not so trivial to actually transport concepts from biology to here. Here we have actually something that was inspired, but is still a little bit different. Huh? Yes, you want to say something?
That if we generalize this use case with not just only three objects, maybe with infinitely small objects, maybe let's say 100. Let's imagine. So the number is 100. So it's still like if it's small, it's still discrete. So
yes, yes. But you imagine that I could have given, I don't know, this was very, very simple initial experiments. I could have given the robots material to manipulate, right? And because these days it happen. I mean, Radhika Nagpal and people actually pushing for discontinuity. Then I think if it's only building an aggregate, I would say that is still close to quantitative, right? All right, so then seed assembly. Yes or no stigmergy? Yes. Qualitative or quantitative? Exactly. Because there, and we didn't realize, that's the point. You want to actually, you see Denneburg company doing the job, you want to mimic that, and we didn't realize that this actually was slightly more complex and actually changing the category of stigmergy that we were applying, because we had these simple rules actually: avoid for big objects and manipulate, pick or drop for small objects. It's a rule that is a function of the perception, right? And then it's qualitative. Stick pooling, stigmergy or not? Who is for yes, who is for no? Who is for yes? Who is for no? All right. All right, yes, that's the third. Who is for yes, why?
Binary.
And?
Binary. If either you're elevating or not elevating, so it's a quantitative but binary. It's either 0 or 1. Either there's someone pulling, therefore it sort of stimulates letting out, or no.
And who is for no, that is against this, yeah? Yes, yes, sir.
when they were pulling the stick, when the first one was pulling the stick, the second one comes and pulls the stick, could it tell the difference between if it was the first one or the second one?
Yes, in the sense that they know if they are, I mean, it's actually smooth and no friction. You can say I'm the first one, and the second one actually will notice that essentially there is something holding. Yeah.
Did they put the stick back?
it's the experimenter that actually put the stick back. Okay, so that doesn't count for stigmergy. Okay, so the answer is non-trivial, and actually I have to say I did the same mistake, but the answer is no. Why is no? Is simply because, I mean, if I pull away, I don't leave a sign, a permanent sign in the environment, right? That's the type of stigmergy you want to have. So if these things, I would actually stay and I take away my robots and are still kind of readable by robots that comes maybe half an hour later, then would be okay, a stigmergy. Here, I think it was a lot of debate when I presented that. I did first time, oh, yeah, nice example of stigmergy. Then there is a colleague from behind saying, no, it's not a stigmergy. So, all right. So I think it's indirect communication. There is this protocol and so on, but you don't leave a sign. And this temporal detachment is very important for classifying as stigmergy. Yeah?
Would you say if pheromones evaporate within a certain period that it stops becoming stigmergy? I mean, the temporal aspect is completely new. And so I would say, because I don't like getting questions wrong, I would say that the stick itself was the environment that got manipulated. And now this is a new dimension that you bring temporal significance.
No, I disagree in the sense that the pheromones stay long enough for actually communicating, for them doing their job.
They evaporated quickly. Does it stop becoming stigmergy?
If nobody else actually can read afterwards, because they are lined and signed and they evaporate so quickly that a guy coming afterwards.
But the second robot notices that the stick is up. So it is reading. It is reading quickly.
Yeah, but if you leave the stick, actually then it comes down, right? And it's not a permanent sign left in the environment. So that's the thing.
My point is that a matter of the definitions being.
But I think if, of course, it's like the quantitative and qualitative, absolutely. But it's a very good point what you make, because essentially we break certain definitions that comes from biology because we see other things, right? But in principle, I would say that it's more acceptable that this is an indirect communication and not a stigmergy. Yeah. If the stick was staying by itself, right? I mean, that you essentially you can open and the stick remain halfway around, then I would say then it's a stigmergic thing. So it's a subtle differences, but I just wanted to make sure that you know more or less what you can expect when you translate messages from biology to our engineering reality, right? All right. So now I think we have already a little bit an idea of swarm robotics, I guess. You have seen pioneering examples. And here I want to pull out one definition that again comes from Marco Dorigo and Eero Sahin that I like very much. Swarm robotics is a study of how a large number of relatively simple physically embodied can be designed such that a desired collective behavior emerges from the local interaction among agents, so interaction among agents and between agents and their environment. And that's what we saw in these experiments, and obviously you want to know more. We have Aiko in the room, and it's actually his book, I think, is really the reference these days. All right, so now is this kind of interaction here among agents and between agents and environment that can be interpreted, okay, by us. And this is a slide slightly modified from what I teach my students, and it's again about this kind of bio-inspiration, right? And you have to be very, very careful. And hopefully this message will resonate with you because they are mainly calm people. So communication in insect societies is happening through direct, indirect, or explicit, implicit, local communication and stigmergy. So by direct is typically, exchange of liquids. It's called trophallaxis, touching antennas and so on, okay? Very local. And there are maybe indirect communication. You could see actually visual movement that is going one way or the other and indicate a certain maneuver or a certain interest to the animals. It's not only just social insects, it's more general than that. All right, so then what is the reality? So if you really kind of think, okay, stigmergy is great and so on, we can leverage. But the reality is this, okay? So this is is the Alice, these 2 centimeters robots. It's probably one of the smallest. Well, Aiko, again, will say, well, we did millimeters. But I mean, we did 40 experiments with 40, 50 aliases, and in his case was really kind of showing that you can go even down with the numbers. Here's an autonomous robot. If you can, actually, mobility, computation is everything on board. And here you see in front of the one of the biggest, I think it's the biggest ant on the world, is a Brazilian ant. And you see immediately the difference in technology, in substrate, right? In hardware substrate. It's about the same size, but this guy is extremely agile, right? It's a fantastic machine that can go everywhere. And this guy is an handicapped. I mean, I can promise you, as soon as you put an alpha millimeter obstacle, it gets stuck, okay? However, what you don't see is that this guy can, even kind of leveraging the proximity sensors, it can communicate fairly, I would say, a few tens of kilobits, depending a little bit of protocol, maybe 1-2 kilobits at 6 centimeters distance. And we also developed, you will see in a minute, a Zigbee compliant kind of radio for these guys, okay? So what I'm saying is that keep that in mind. So go behind pure kind of bio-inspired engineering. Keep in mind that our technology has advantages and drawbacks. Try to kind of mitigate the drawbacks of our technology. If you want to think stigmergy, you have to kind of walk around. You have to be mobile somehow. But maybe you have radio that can help the deal, and actually maybe interesting is to kind of leverage this more direct local communication as opposed to stigmergy or in general, right? I mean, you leverage a little bit more the individuals as opposed to the environment. I'm not saying don't think about that. That's also the purpose of this talk. I mean, but keep in mind these kind of strengths and weaknesses and differences between biology and artificial artifacts. All right, so now we move to direct communication. And here, the first example that I have is something that, you know, what is COM, right? For us is a commodity or something like this. That is something that we have around that we want to leverage. But the use that we do is sometimes probably not exactly what you think. And here you have an example. So we use often is maybe too much, but sometimes we have used communication as a sensor, okay? The fact that you are in communication tells me something about how far you are, right? And so this is a very simple example, and it's an academic example. Again, we did that because we wanted also to model or test an architecture, a control architecture. It depends a little bit on the experiments that we did. But this was initiated by Alan Winfield, who is between robotics and COM, I would say, and Julien Emberini, that then came also to our lab. And so the algorithm here is the alpha algorithms is very simple. So essentially what you do is if you are in communication contact, you actually are free to move. As soon as you lose communication, in principle local communication, you actually do a under 80 degrees turn, and you try to reacquire your communication, okay? Once you reacquire, you actually pick a random angle. So here you see this little movie as an example. Is essentially maintaining with two states cohesion of an amalgam of robots, right? Maybe swarming behavior or something. Nothing that is essentially coming up with a specific form or so. So here you see one of the first examples. I mean, and again, the COM is not essential for us, so this was used as a sensor. This is a sped up video, I don't know how much, it's coming from Alan. And on top here, it's actually they use it, these are robots, the more bots, I think that robots that big. Wi-Fi, but Wi-Fi is way larger, it's not local for this arena, which is maybe 8 by 8 meters. And so they dock the communication, they actually track with an overhead camera, they dock the communication up after 1 meter or two, right? So it's essentially somehow immediately using as a sensor, but somehow helping to control the communication channel in a way that it can be kind of use it and explore it as a sensor. And then a few years later, I said, well, now we want to really do with real COM, but we did with EPAC, so much smaller. was published in the 2013, and these are 40 epochs where instead there is no cheating here. It's just actually tracking from above. And we designed it a ZigBee compliant module, and we actually inserted hardware attenuators. So these guys you can really kind of program in a way that communicate between 10 centimeters and 3 meters, okay? And here I don't recall what was the parameter set, the algorithm parameter alpha, which I also don't recall exactly the meaning, but essentially you can kind of keep somehow the robots around a cluster, this kind of dynamic cluster with just communication, okay? And you don't share, in this case, any information, right? And again, I mean, maybe not so interesting for you, but this is also, I want to show you the perspective that sometimes we pick. So now, I want to go a little bit deeper. Since we have radio, I want to stick to small scale and show you what you can do if you actually share explicitly information, okay? And this is work done by my first PhD students, and now is associate professor at Boulder, on turbine inspection, Nicolas Corel. So here, when we were in US, the NASA Glenn Center came to us and saying, oh, would be nice, you know, any minutes that you spend actually to ground a plane for inspection is money, it's a lot of money, right? And so if you have a technique to actually inspect automatically with a swarm of robots, so a little bit kind of blue sky thing, swarm of robots that can go into a turbine of a given type and so on, and actually tell us whether we have to open the turbine, dismantle or not, it's great. Otherwise, we typically actually they anchor, they have their own monitoring, online monitoring, they anchor the plane and they spend with a technician about 2 days to inspect, making the turbine moving slightly and inspecting whether there are flows and so on and so on. So it's also kind of a safety issue, right, obviously. All right. So this is a general category. You want to inspect a 3D structure, which is more or less complex. You have to be small enough to go in. You have kind of, somehow you are part of a Faraday cage, so communication is limited as well. And obviously, we never get to this point. Other people that focus on a single robot and trying to climb and all sorts of things. It's a large, extremely large market, okay? It's not only plane turbine of planes, but also gas turbine and so on and so on. Right? Okay, it's inspection of complex structures is very important. And so what we wanted to do is say, okay, let's focus. We are multi-robot people. We want to focus on coordination. We open the turbine. Okay, it's a 2D turbine now. You will see. But the blade dimension, and the interblade distances, and so on is copied from a real turbine. So we didn't want to cheat anything there. All right. So then you have to really think about these things, right? Computation, energy, and so on, and communication, obviously, and the fact that essentially you have a lot of noisy, the smaller you are, the less accurate you are in navigation, and you have to handle this, all right? So this was our setup, kind of these 25 blades in an enclosed arena, space it in an appropriate way, same appropriate dimension. We could actually reproduce this in a high fidelity simulation. Here you notice also a setup, I'll come back to that, where you color code somehow the blades. All right. So then, as we do, actually we track things. We do performance evaluation with from an external perspective. Here's an overhead camera. And here we developed, by the way, if you are interested, open source tracker. It's called Swiss Track. It's still maintained more or less over the years. We have a little community that use that. The robots is the same as before, 2 centimeters, very limited, just to give you an idea of the limitation that you have. Can kind of detect obstacles at 3 centimeters, 6 centimeters. They can communicate peer-to-peer with an infrared protocol, and it's very slow as well. What we did on top here, we added a sandwich, right? It's always been a little bit the characteristics for our robots to actually be modular. And then that helps us to actually add another layer for communication, a ZigBee compliant 802.15.4 module and on top also a camera that with a dedicated microcontroller so that they can read, essentially, principle emulate the scanning maneuver. You want to actually scanning for flow, and here can also read the color code. Obviously, you have to downsample and so on and so on. But eventually, you have in the same footprint, so to speak, you have 3 microcontrollers, and the cube become 2 by 2 by 3, so to speak. Huh? All right. Okay, so now, yes? All right. So that's the way, maybe also a very important diagram for showing you the way that we think in multi-robot systems community. And this is actually taken from, and then rearrange it, and a number of people actually rethink about that, but it's essentially always the same story. It's taken from Nidhi Karla, a PhD, visiting PhD students at CMU. So essentially, you can boil down any multi-robot kind of system, or multi-vehicle. Actually, it's the people that came out with the same diagram are people that cares about intelligent vehicles. With these 2 axes, where you have here the degree of coordination, okay, and here the degree of deliberation. So how much intelligence locally you have, how much planning, versus how much you collaborate, okay? And in principle, I mean, you would like to actually go in this diagonal where you can have good capacities locally for planning and so on, but also capabilities of coordinating. And obviously, COM is here, right? COM is actually an enabler for coordinating. That's the way that we think, all right? So here I want to show you actually 2 of the 5 algorithms that we actually developed for this specific very same case study. So that's also what we like a lot, benchmarking on the real robots, okay? We have a system, we want to see which algorithms for a given setup, for a given mission and so on, is competitive. And we started from 2 fully reactive, so one not even with explicit collaboration, the other one is actually beaconing, so you do a blade, you kind of do an inspection of a blade, and you stay there signaling this is done, okay? And the people that comes close, I say, okay, I move to another blade because this is done. And then 3 deliberative algorithms, and I will show you one, where you can plan without localizing and no collaboration, then you can plan with absolute collaboration, localization and collaboration. I'll come back to that. And then even a market-based approach for kind of sharing these things on the market. And for that, actually, if you want to really kind of collaborate explicitly, you need communication. Okay. And these open up, the fact that you have explicit communication open up a number of other opportunities that you would not have with this kind of simple thing. All right, so no planning in this case, and very simple. And the only thing that you can do is here, moving coordination, typically, there is no radio here, that's the configuration. You can only essentially emit a signal, a broadcasting signal saying, okay, here I'm done, and so on. And I start here with even the most simplest one where there is not this signal, right? And this is a very, very basic, but then I will ask you how efficient you think it is, algorithms. It's carefully calibrated. It's a behavior-based controller. You avoid obstacles. Obstacle means other robots or walls and so on. You search for a blade. You attach to the blade. You actually circumnavigate the blade. We assume that essentially we have scanned it. We have completed the maneuver here. Sorry. All right. Maybe I don't have to move there. Okay. So, and then you leave for the next blade, right? I mean, and you carefully calibrate when you leave and the length, and you know the geometry of the blade, blah, blah, okay? It's all done with these infrared sensors, nothing else, okay? And then you can close the loop. And here is how it looks, I mean, with 40 analyses. Then you can track the performance from above, how good they are scanned. So sounds a little bit random, but once they attach, they do their maneuvering around, and they cover, right? I mean, if you assume that essentially one of them does the inspection task like this one, when he's circumnavigating the blade, then the performance is interesting. All right, so that's and just to tell you, so that's the only result slide that I wanted to have here. Here's a model that we did. It's perfectly in principle, very carefully importing all the technology and the blade dimension and so on. So you have the model in the dashed things and the real experiments in the green line. Number of blades inspected over time. You see how good, with different size of robots, how good we can be. And in this case, we use it on top on a system identification algorithms to fine-tune parameters. So this was actually a nice exercise. It was well received by DARS, which is one of our conference. We won an award there. All right, so we can do that. We can, despite the fact that it's extremely simple, we can really kind of capture these things, okay? And that's the trick, also to kind of still give some guarantees on these very simple examples. All right, so now, didn't do anything here.
Maybe it's the remote.
Should I switch off?
Yeah, maybe it's Bluetooth and that it interferes with the extended.
Let's try this. Oh, we have to again go out and.
No, it's
Oh. So I will move to end remote end pointer, physical pointer. All right, good. All right, so then essentially the idea is that now we add our wireless communication on top, and we want to go along this line. We start actually doing a little bit more planning here. And on top, we could actually then follow up with more collaboration. But essentially, at the local level, if you have a little bit more computation on board, okay, you can start, and actually the planning is done with this extra microcontroller that we added. You can actually build a minimal spanning trees and then say, okay, I have to do this, a more systematic search of this turbine, okay? That you can do, and you can observe whether there are then unexpected slippery and so on, they slip a lot and so on, and it can restart over. So it's not particularly efficient, but as long as you don't sleep and you actually follow a little bit this kind of discrete structure, it's pretty powerful. Then what you could do is actually you add also localization. You have a camera there. We color code, you will see in a minute, the blades, and you use your collaboration capabilities through radio for doing what? For actually building a map, and when you encounter, you're in communication with someone else, you actually share your maps, okay? So very simple thing, but you can do in this 2 by 2 by 3 centimeters mechatronic device. So this is, again, you have errors there, the camera is not perfect and so on, but you have an idea, so it's color coded, you have an idea where you are. It could be actually an RFID that you read or something like this, all right? And here is, you see the videos, you see much cleaner things, it's a little bit sped up. They don't actually interfere each other, they actually plan the map and they don't go, the interferences is limited and so on, at the price of more computational power. Right, so here now it comes to a question to you. So what do you think, how efficient is this? I mean, now we compare, I have one slide that compares all the 5 algorithms on the same metrics, the amount of blades surveyed over time or something like that. So what do you think? So how competitive is one thing? So remember that we went up radically with the complexity, right? More computational power, more communication. So you think?
How are you defining efficiency? So when you say efficiency, what's your KPI?
In this case is number of blades per minute. That's the metrics that we used. So kind of the coverage efficiency. If you want. But so just a guess. You think it's you are competitive with the first algorithm? Yes.
The more complex is better.
The more complex is better.
If you think about completeness and not how many blades in time, I would bet on one of the more complex algorithms. Maybe not the most complex one, because then it used a lot of power. Maybe the sweet spot is before. But from my experience with these Roomba robots,
Yeah.
And the early ones, they always went just random walk. And if you look at the customer satisfaction, they are not so great. But if you look at the more expensive one by Vorwerk, the Cobalt, who maps the room, and our room is clean, but we spent €1,000 on that thing.
It's a very good comparison. I didn't think about, but it's exactly the feeling. Here there is one argument more. So that's exactly it's also the solar movers of Husqvarna and so on. They're all randomized algorithms, right? I mean, yes. Well, how much? 5 minutes or so?
Can I ask something?
Yes.
So when two robots are together, with the proximity and they share maps, does that mean the one when they converge on the maps, does that mean that any of the two robots will go to sites that the other one already visited?
Yes.
Or they still do that?
No, they don't do it. I mean,
So you visit one site only once.
Yes, in principle. And then you could actually say, oh, okay, the fact that you have visited, there is an error in the localization and so on, and I want to compensate for that, so I maybe revisit if you very unreliable in the localization, right? But in principle, they don't do that, right?
I would say if you have efficient routing between sites, then it should be more the complicated ones, probably more efficient than the random ones.
Yes. Here's the the results as neutral as possible. So, in a sense, you were right. So here's the kind of the median time to completion. With a very sophisticated one, is actually not even the one that I showed you. It's even kind of sharing the market of the blades. You can even be better here. Maybe what you also notice is that this is standard deviation on the performance. You have also more consistency. It's consistently better. But we were surprised how performant you can be with something like that. Extremely, so it's not that far away. And look here how much you can screw by actually having localization and planning. So no absolute localization, more planning, more sophistication. And then if even you don't have localization and you communicate, you actually jam, you actually perturb even the performance of the other guys, okay? You really need to go with the whole package to actually beat the first algorithm. That's very interesting. The advantage, the clear advantage is that if you find a flaw, you know what it is right away. Here you don't know. Essentially they have no localization and you can monitor the progress and so on. So okay, so now since we are a little bit running out of time, I will show you maybe only one example here of the three and conclude, because otherwise it's too long. So I wanted to show you that essentially when you have these kind of constraints, you really try to squeeze out the best that you can from your hardware, right? And these are severe constraints. You might fly, you might actually go underwater, whatever, or might have to be small as the one that I showed you. And then you better actually get the best. So there are many examples, right, where vision-based you use for communication, but also for sensing, ultra-wideband-based you use for ranging and communication, infrared-based as well, and so on. Okay? And I want to focus just one example, if you allow me on one example. So there are three examples here, and I'm happy to talk with you afterwards. One is in infrared-based transceiver. The other one is an electro-permanent magnet. So here you have localization and communication, maybe low speed, a few tens of kilobits, low range, a few meters. You have electro-permanent magnets that does the function of latching and at the same time serve as an inductive channel. So essentially you have to be in contact almost. And it's a low speed, but it's essentially we can communicate between modules thanks to this kind of firstly designed latching mechanism. Ultrasound in underwater robotics, you can use as an acoustic modem, as a communication channel, but also for ranging and bearing, okay? And again, I mean, that's very important. The way that we think in robotics is actually essential. So here I wanted to just show you, maybe it's interesting for you. This is a long story we started already at Caltech. This is an infrared-based range embedding and communication device. Got published in 2009 on transactional mechatronics. So it's something that essentially, this is the communication performance, is small, but actually it's very fast. You can get, even nowadays, 500 hertz, 1000 hertz, for actually getting range embedding between two robots. And you can communicate, use the communication for sharing DID, and that's it. And then you can kind of beef up the communication if you have Wi-Fi and so on. But at least you can already build all sort of things, kind of formation, all sort of experiments. Here I have just one experiment to show you how, what we can do with that. These are graph-based control algorithms with some, in the next time, some planning on top. Everything is on board with these modules. There is nothing that is outside. And they have to move, actually, they have to cross, and they plan, in this case, also the trajectories with the receding horizon approach. And look at this. I mean, it's everything on board, it's local, and this is centralized, it's controlled from outside. So almost don't notice the difference, right? So having tools like that actually allow us to play around in the lab with all sort of control strategies. And here I don't want to show you the experiments. They're actually running now. We redesigned these things for quadrotors. We are running now 3-4 quadrotors testing in the lab with the very same experiments. You can place there's no longer a geometry to respect. You can place as more or less as you want the receivers. So let me go to the conclusion here. And I'm sorry that I have to skip a little bit the story here, but I mean, as I said, this is a new talk. I never calibrated the length. Obviously, it was too long. All right, so the take-home messages for you. So trust me, communication plays a very important role in swarm robotics or distributed robotics. It's actually an important role for coordination, and I think you can assume multiple facets, direct, indirect, and so on. It's even more true in social robotics, where you have multi-robots within multi-people, right? Or with mixed societies, with insects, and so on. So keep that in mind. I made the point clear. Our substrate, our technology, so first of all, software and hardware is our differentiation. Nature does not do that. But it's very important that you actually leverage the strength and mitigate the limitations, and not just, I mean, you can be bio-inspired with a certain carefulness, I would say. The performance evaluation for us is always at a system level. And so while I say it's very important communication, I also say you actually, your communication is a component of the system. It's only one. I'm sorry to say, it's not for robotics, it's the body, it's the material, it's the control, right? Many things. So you can have a super fantastic communication channel, and then the performance might be poor because you didn't optimize the rest. And when you have limited onboard resources or peculiar environments, I mean, we always think about having more than communication out of a communication channel. And here I showed you one example, but I have many others where we can actually combine two functions with the same hardware device. Thank you very much. Sorry for being there.